Because we talk about how belonging and fitting in are two different things. And very often when we exclude people, it has to do with us wanting to fit in, right? We think that it's got to do with them. We're trying to include them and they're having a hard time, but actually it's because we're having a hard time. So can you talk a little bit about that, or maybe tie it to some sort of an incident or something that they can connect with?
Fitting in. Yeah. This is like a new concept that Brene Brown introduced to me, so y'all should read Brene Brown. But everybody wants to belong, right? You want to belong, you want to feel welcome. But oftentimes as humans, we confuse belonging with fitting in, right? And belonging is just belonging. Means you just be and you belong, right? Fitting in is adjusting yourself, shifting yourself so that you fit into whatever category or assumption or standard exists. And so oftentimes when we are trying to include ourselves, so not even talking about including other people, okay, just like include yourself into something, we see that there is a standard, a benchmark, a perspective, a lifestyle that is accepted. And so we change ourselves to fit in. And we think that if we fit in, then all is well and all is good. But what we don't realize is that when you change yourself, then you're not being real about who you are quite often. And that often will lead to like lack of self-awareness anyway. So like a lot of stuff happens. I forgot what the question was.
Yeah, about fitting in and belonging. So maybe let me tie it to them a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So for example, we had an incident 2 years ago, maybe something like that, where we had an IP student come to our church, right? And she was mean and not nice. And it dawned on me that education does not produce empathy. And of course my first reaction is very judgy because I was protective of our students who were not as smart or educated as she was. And when I went back to reflect, I realized, wait a minute, she just doesn't realize that she's doing it to fit in. That when she says, I'm smart, I'm from this school, I'm from whatever, it's a way of fitting in. And sometimes in the process, you other someone out so that you feel like you belong, right? So we talked about this a few days ago again, right? We talked about how even oppressing somebody or excluding somebody comes out of a shame mentality. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
We see this in the world right now, whether it's racism or xenophobia, or if you're in school, if you're in high school or college, university, like bullying. There's no greater like neurological drug for the human brain than creating a common enemy. It's like so easy to create an enemy and then just hate that person or that country together, to demean them, to bemoan them, etc. The church does it too, and it gets pretty ugly, I would say. But I would say in this context, it's the idea that, so we know this from child psychology, the bullies, the people that the bullies are closest with are the people they're bullying, in terms of what they're going through mentally in a high school. Like the struggle that the bully's having, it's almost always linked to what the way the bully is not affirmed at home. And so then the bully goes into school seeking to be affirmed, and does that by trying to be the biggest on the block, right? So like that's a very violent, terrible way. But if you actually like boil it all the way down, it's really just someone who wants to belong, someone who wants to be seen. And I'm 35. Again, I'm probably the oldest in the room. And I would say to y'all, especially if you're still in school, like a 35-year-old is still dealing with the sorts of not belonging when you're like 10, 11, 12. Some of my deepest scars come from childhood. They're actually not coming from my moments now, or even in the last decade. They're coming from things I'm still continuing to have to address when I felt like I didn't belong, or I was told that I didn't belong, from the ages of like 5 to 20. And so it feels like, I'm kind of playing on some psychology anyway in this, but it's like we develop what we want to be between those ages, and then we spend the rest of our lives either chasing that or like reconciling that. So like if you're between 15 and 30, you're probably downloading some narratives about you that you're expected to live. And I would just say, like, confront those things, like in the name of God, in the name of your future, in the name of your friends and your potential sibling or partners, and especially in your children. Because if you don't do that self-awareness work, you'll just be a 35-year-old that's dealing with the same exclusion that you're dealing with now as a 12-year-old. Like, it's just going to be 23 years later.
Yeah, and there is something to be said, right? Because as we're talking about building inclusive spaces, we keep thinking about this outward reaching in and bringing people in. But like simultaneously, as we're being transformed by the people coming in, we've got to kind of do the work of working it out in our lives, right? To identify shame and all that.